Okay. All right. Hi, I'm Anna. Nice to meet you guys. So, the purpose of this speech was for us to talk about our three favorite forms of improving our interpersonal communication. For me, reading about nonverbal communication, conflict management, and listening has been a really big eye opener for me. For nonverbal communication, I use this a lot, especially when I'm with a group of my friends and like we would typically see somebody we don't like and kind of give that like that look that people would normally share. I think this is typical for a lot of friend groups, not just and just anyone in general. Nonverbal communication is obviously not exclusive to like friend groups only. Nonverbal communication could be used with precisely anyone. In section 5.1 of our textbooks, an example is being given where someone of Japanese culture is being offered a drink, and in their culture it is kind of uncomfortable for them to verbally say no. So this results to them either giving a hand gesture of rejecting the drink, and the opposite would be a nod up and down as a way of saying thank you and wanting to receive the drink. The reason I bring this up is because there are so many different ways of nonverbal communication and so many different international versions of nonverbal communication that are the complete opposite of what someone else would be familiar with. Now, this would bring me to my second form of interpersonal communication, which is conflict management. I bring this form up second because it sort of relates to dealing with different international nonverbal communications. In section 9.4 of our textbook, conflict management is described as the process of trying to find effective strategies to minimize and solve problems. During the hypothetical situation in section 5.1 that I stated previously, with some people who are not familiar with these certain cultural habits, they would need to take some time to try and figure out why they're not familiar with it and what it actually means. In our textbooks, it also states that conflict management is a mix of factors such as nonverbal signals. Learning more about conflict management, I would put these towards my work situations. When reading this chapter, I would create hypothetical work situations and try to use the examples in the textbook. And this would kind of give me a physical feel of how I could possibly handle certain situations in a more professional way. Lastly, this brings me to my third favorite form of interpersonal communication, which is listening. I chose listening because I feel like I already have such great listening skills, but reading more about it, it gave me more tips on how to be a better listener. As stated in section 6.1 of our textbooks, it says to help you improve your own listening skills, you must have a better understanding of why listening is so important. The reason why I gave this part of the section is because even though I believe I have impeccable listening skills, I sometimes don't understand why listening is so important for our lives. After reading the situations given in the textbook, I also learned a lot about how listening is another form of communication within relationships. Even though when we think of like the word communication, our minds automatically make it seem as if it's verbal communication. Under the section, the listening process of chapter 6.1, it says, quote unquote, listening is an active process where we make sense of, interpret, and respond to messages we receive. This obviously shows that listening is more complex than we make it to be. Let's say we're talking to somebody, but you end up spacing out. You hear their voice, but you're not paying attention to what that person is saying. All you hear is the rhythm of their voice, and you can tell that they're talking. After they're done talking, you're now unsure of what that person has said. Not being able to figure out what that person said makes the relationship in that moment decrease. It would show that you're not entirely interested in their conflicts, if you had told them in the beginning that you were. Listening is a way of understanding what the other person is going through, and listening builds relationships. And when you have that feeling you're not being listened to, it could break your relationships. And these three forms of communications have definitely helped me a little bit more in building and keeping relationships. Thank you.
Okay. So I think you did really good on your presentation. I definitely relate to the culture, is that what you said about not like the hand symbol of like saying like not saying no because it's like a sign of like disrespect or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that.
Mhm.
I definitely relate to that because I am afraid of saying no because I want to because like I don't wanna be very disrespectful, like, say
Yeah,
if I'm going to a party and I'm eating so much food and everyone, like, tells me, like, "Oh, like, go eat more, go eat more." I'm like, I wanna be like, "Oh, well, like, no, I'm okay, like, I'm already full." But I
yeah,
feel like if I say that, they're gonna take offense and be like, "Oh, so you don't like my food," kinda thing, you know?
exactly.
So, like, I relate to that and also about the listening.
Mhm.
The part where you talked about how you know someone is talking, but you kinda space out, but you just hear them, like, you just hear their voice. I do that so much and it sucks. I
Yeah,
try to not do that, but, like, sometimes my mind just spaces out of nowhere, so that's something I need to improve on, but I like how you mentioned that because I did not it felt good to know that I didn't feel alone kinda thing.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you, thank you.
Yeah.
I would say I definitely enjoy your topic. In fact, I was going to do my topic on a similar thing because I feel like listening is just so important. It's like the most important form of communication and nonverbal communication. Just because I tend to struggle with nonverbal communication cues sometimes, so I'll
Yeah,
just make stuff up and just try to assume I know what's going on because I struggle with that. And I
yeah.
do feel like a lot of times I can definitely relate to being in like a gathering. I remember the first time I went to my boyfriend's family Thanksgiving, they
Mm.
fed me so much food, like, it was so much food, and I felt so guilty saying, like, "Okay, like, no more food," but I can tell people no, so I very bluntly told them no, but
Yeah.
I definitely feel like, depending on the culture, it can be very rude just to very bluntly say no, so I
Mhm.
feel like that's another thing when you're in a different, situation in which you're used to, like, when do you say no? When do you say yes? And I feel like whether that's like a completely different culture, like for
Mhm.
your example about Japan, where how people like wave their hands no, but they don't directly say no, or whether
Mhm.
you're just visiting someone else's family, even within the same culture, people express things differently,
Yeah.
and different families have different rules about how to communicate with one another and how to say no. And I
Mhm.
definitely feel like when it comes to listening, I feel like a lot of people can work on, not hearing people, but actually listening to what they say rather
Mhm.
than just waiting for an opportunity to just talk. I feel like that's a big problem in the US, just waiting for people to just talk so you can talk. I feel like we don't really do good at listening. And I love the way you cited your sources. I feel like you went straight to the point. You had like a good citation going on. You're like, yeah, in this paragraph and this book. I was like, oh, look at you. You actually did what you're supposed to do. Proud.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. One of my favorite concepts that I plan to use that will help my interpersonal communication is emotions. And in the textbook, it says emotions are constituted by a process of categorizing the self as being in an emotional state, and emotions are heavily influenced by our social interactions and communication with others. And one quote that stood out to me was like, often we find ourselves focused on the feeling we are experiencing in the moment rather than the ability to accurately address the emotional stimulus related to the resulting emotional effects. And I believe like this quote like really speaks to me because I usually act out in the moment rather than really taking the time to process what everyone is like saying and just generally like not taking accountability for my actions. Cause like the way I was raised, I grew up with like very strict parents. So every time I did something wrong, like they would just automatically act out. They would just start yelling and start like, like acting erratically and not really know how to manage their anger. So basically, I feel like I got my anger issues from them and I kind of let my emotions take over rather than trying to take control of them. So this has created issues with my relationships such as friends, family, like boyfriends, and I've never understood as to why I had issues until I had to like reflect on every relationship that has ended. And looking back, I realized I need to work on taking control of my emotions and how my emotions can affect my relationships. So I guess I just need to work on taking control of them, and I guess I just felt misunderstood, so probably that's why most of these issues happened. So like some ways I can improve is by like naming the emotions I'm feeling and monitoring my reactions. And I feel like by doing that like can help, improve the reflection of my actions and like decrease the amount of times that I act out. So I think that's one of like the main two things I'll try to do to like improve in my emotions. Um my other favorite concept that will improve my interpersonal communication is influences on perception. In a textbook, it says our cultural groups or cultural identities shape our perceptions of others. There are pros and cons to them, and I will mention like one for each. So, like one pro is that we get to share culture to those that have never experienced a certain kind of culture, such as like making them traditional foods in like our culture. And one con is that some people may judge how we do things in our culture, but we tend to connect with those who have similar like beliefs, values, languages, like etc. Um, with that being said, even though it is good to connect with those who are similar, I believe we should also connect with those that are different from us, even though it can like lead to like although it can create some like tension and disagreements, this can like help not only like me but others as well, like having an open mind and see from other people's perspectives on like certain situations. So, like, with that also being said, like, exploring and experiencing different cultures around the world can help you identify who you are and how you were, like, raised and stuff like that. So, like, although there will be, like, stereotypes, we should all learn to accept others for who they are or where they came from. Like, just because someone lives a different lifestyle than you does not mean, like, they should be excluded or even have any opportunities taken away from them due to their, like, background, like, such as, like, a job kind of thing. So, my last favorite concept that I think will help improve my interpersonal communication is nature of language. Verbal communication helps us define reality, and our area of language and identity has taken on greater prominence, which is like the use of pronouns. And in a textbook, it says a pronoun is a word that can function by itself as a noun phrase, and that refers to either someone or something. Like, for example, we use pronouns to help us reference someone's gender. And like in my case, like my pronouns are she, her. I identify as a woman. And I believe the role of pronouns in recognizing slash acknowledging someone's gender identity is by respecting who they are, whether it is she, her, he, him, they, them, like etc. Um, it's just like a sign of respect and that you value them no matter their identity. And personally, I am a very cautious person and I do not want to misgender people. So I usually just ask out of like respect, and this can help. I believe people asking can help others, make them feel like very welcome and accepted rather than having them like being afraid or brought down for using different pronouns. Um, so not only will it help me, but it will also help them because we can create a connection just by simply making the person feel welcomed. So like therefore like nature of language is what I believe will help my future interactions, whether it is someone new or someone I've known for a while. So yeah, that's it.
All right, I wanted to say that I definitely relate to the emotions thing. I would say a lot of times growing up, my family didn't have the healthiest models of emotion. They're very aggressive people, but not aggressive because of like making a mistake. They just are aggressive. When they get mad, they be all like nip 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 blip you, and super
Yeah.
aggressive when they get mad.
Mhm.
I would say it's definitely important because I went to therapy and I learned that it's really important to, before you say something when you're feeling emotional, to really sit in your emotions, just like you mentioned, like in the textbook when it said, you need to like sit before you react. Just because you feel the first thing that you feel and you may say something hurtful in that moment of being in your feelings. So it's really important to just sit back and think, and also to identify how you feel. Because I feel like when you first are upset, you don't typically know exactly what you're feeling. It can take a couple of moments, just like in the textbook they talked about, to identify feelings. And once you identify feelings, you should always use that, I feel statements. But I do feel like a lot of times in, most interpersonal relationships, especially when you're upset, it's very easy to say you and it's very easy to be defensive. And I do feel like for the emotional piece, it does help with teaching you how to communicate your emotions in a more effective way.
Mhm.
I
Definitely.
totally agree. Sometimes me personally, I have a lot of trouble like talking about how I feel. And I loved how you gave kind of examples of how you could improve your emotion skills and all that entire just like all that stuff about like trying to let out your emotions but doing it in the proper way and all that kind of stuff. I really enjoyed that. Um, and then going off to like how you mirror off of how your parents have raised you and compared to like now that you're like already grown up, like with your own mind and everything, I totally believe that like based off of what your parents have shown you growing up, it is possible for you to mirror it. But I also believe that there's a way for teenagers now or just people in general, just like they're able to change the way that they express emotions by just using different exercises and all that kinds of stuff. So, and I loved how you gave kind of your like small little personal examples, kind of fitting in with the topics that you chose, and it was a great speech.
Thank you.
My speech is really good. I also think another good thing about your speech is once again the citation. Very
Yep.
nice. I feel like it flowed very easily. You gave the citation, right at the right moment, I feel like as well. So I think overall you had a really good speech, I think, and then the way you spoke was really clear and smooth. I would say the only thing I feel like that you could have done better is like I know she always emphasized standing in speeches if you can, maybe
Mhm.
having your computer up a little bit higher while you stand in the speech. But overall, I think you did really good, and you did, and I
Thank
bet you
you.
practiced too. So
Yeah, I noticed I was moving my chair a lot when I went like this. So I was like, "Oh my god, like I need to stop." And I realized I kept doing it without even noticing. So I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I need to work on that too." I think it's just like being like nervous and like kind
Yeah.
of like anxiety, like doing these little.
Definitely. I think it's a nervous reaction because I know on one of my speeches where when it wasn't live recorded, I was just swinging because I like to move anyway. When I sit, I just like to move and fidget. So it was like
Yeah.
subconsciously, I just like to move. It's not always, I feel like it's not always an anxiety thing when you move either. Because sometimes I'm anxious and I sit perfectly still. I just feel like it's just like as a person, do you like to fidget or do you not like to fidget? And it's hard to like stop yourself from fidgeting when you subconsciously fidget.
Mhm.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.